Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gaynor, I want to thank you on behalf of the people of Missouri for you and your team's work in the state, your hard work this year in what has been an unprecedented flooding season in the state of Missouri, and I enjoyed the chance to talk with you at some length about this last week in my office. Let me just ask you a few of the questions, a few of the topics, or return to a few of the topics that we discussed, beginning with individual assistance. And as I said to you then, this question of the distribution of IA is the top issue my constituents face when they are in the midst of the sort of severe flooding that we've experienced in my state. I wrote to you about this on July 31st, and you responded on August the 30th. Let me just ask you, among the issues that are very important to us in the state of Missouri is the designation, FEMA's designation of counties that might be available or eligible for IA. Can you explain a little bit how FEMA goes about making that designation? Because this is a question that I have at home all the time and that, frankly, Missourians want to hear about.
Yes, sir. So we just in the general look at a disaster, we try to look at every disaster as its unique disaster. We look at it on its own merits because we want to be fair and objective about the level of disaster and the level of impact on a community. When it comes to determining the level of impact in a community, we do this as a team. So local emergency managers, state emergency managers, and my team, the federal emergency managers, go out into the community and look at disaster, damage from a disaster. So we call it a preliminary damage assessment, PDAs. From all those PDAs, we determine does it meet criteria? And then it goes to the governor of the state to determine if he or she wants to forward a request for a major declaration to the president. There's lots in between that, but that's the simple process. In some cases, it's obvious how big the damage is. In other cases, it takes a little while. Flooding is problematic. Especially this year, we've had flooding from the Canadian border to the Mexico border and as wide as Kansas to Kentucky and many other states in there. About 47 disasters this year out of about 7 disasters were flooding.
Let me ask you this. Tell us about how FEMA communicates with and conducts assessments in hard-to-reach areas. Of course, in my state, the areas that have been hardest hit by the flooding, most of the areas that have been hardest hit, are rural. Some of them are very rural, and something that I hear a lot from folks there who have been affected is they don't know. I mean, they don't know what the status is of their claims. They don't know what FEMA's doing. They're not always sure how to get in touch with you or what the process is for submitting a claim. So how do you go about communicating that?
Yes, sir. So in a disaster, it's really door to door, right? Going out again with that team and getting door to door and seeing if people have been impacted, recording all that, encouraging people to register so they can be in the registry. So if they have a claim, we know about it and we can track it. In some cases, power is down, you can't get on your internet, maybe you have no telephone service, you can't get on your telephone, but the last resort is knocking on doors to make sure we get to every single person. So it is intensive, but we want to make sure that we touch everyone and not miss anyone.
Let me ask you about something odd that we've seen with the flooding in Missouri here this past year, and that is some of my constituents being awarded IA, individual assistance, and then FEMA asking for the money back. In one case in Craig, Missouri, for instance, FEMA demanded that a constituent rescind her IA because her home was a second home. But of course, she'd only acquired this so-called second home because her first home was flooded and was unavailable, and she'd applied for IA in Craig at her first home, where she lived for most of her life. But then when she moved to this other residence, then she was ultimately asked to give the money back. And that's just one example. I've heard many similar cases. Can you elaborate for us how that kind of thing happens and what the right remedy is?
Yes, sir. I mean, I can't comment exactly on all the facts, but I'd be happy to work with you and your staff to kind of maybe unravel some of those facts, not only on that one, but any that you may have. So the way we operate is on eligibility. If it's eligible under the law, then typically we will provide disaster assistance. The other thing that we have to balance is duplication of benefits. Is there another agency out there? Is insurance pay out first? I mean, there's lots of different criteria that we use to make sure that, first of all, we get disaster assistance in the hands of disaster survivors, and we keep with the intent of the law, right? We don't want to give more than the law allows, because then again, we're forced to come back and in this case, the example that you gave, have to come back and get it. That's the last thing we want to do. So In some cases, we're slow and deliberate to make sure we get it right the first time. But again, I'd be happy to look into some of these cases and maybe provide some greater detail to you and your staff.
Great. Well, we look forward to working with you on that, and I thank you again for the work that FEMA has done in Missouri this past year. A lot of Missourians still have questions. Of course, a lot of them are still out of their homes. I mean, the flooding has been quite severe in the state. The displacement has been broad and wide, and we look forward to continuing to work with you and your staff to make sure that people get the assistance that they need and that they get the information that they need in order to understand the process and apply and get the assistance. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.